How's it going, guys? It's Harvey from Switch 1000. Today is August 23rd, 2020, and we're gonna completely focus on Tropical Storm Marco as well as Tropical Storm Laura. So let's get right into it by talking about Tropical Storm Marco, which is currently a couple hundred miles north of Cancun, Mexico, and it's pretty much spiraling right around the middle of the Gulf of Mexico at this point. And you could see from my last video only about 15 hours ago, it looked a lot less healthy. There was a lot less convection. There was a lot less of these blow-ups of thunderstorms like you see today. And this is showing a sign of strengthening, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the next update it strengthens into hurricane status, as the National Hurricane Center has been tracking this storm, and over the past several hours it has been strengthening. And based off of this convection we're seeing right around the center of circulation as well as towards the eastern portion of this storm, I wouldn't at all be surprised if within the next update, which comes out at around 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, we have a hurricane on our hands at 75 miles per hour. And right now the storm's a 70 mile per hour storm with its millibar pressure down to 994. And what's interesting is that even though the wind speed of this storm has been going up, the millibar pressure has mainly stayed the same since it was just only a couple miles to the northeast of Cancun, Mexico. And I think the reason why is because the circulation may have gotten smaller. The energy of the storm is focusing more towards the center of circulation rather than spreading out. So that means it's likely we have a smaller circulation with this storm than yesterday. And while the millibar pressure hasn't gone down, it seems like the max wind speed has gone up, which is showing that this circulation is definitely getting smaller and it's focusing more of its and the energy is focusing more in the center of circulation, which could mean that the wind field of the storm will be a little bit small as it makes landfall somewhere between Louisiana and Mississippi on Monday. So that's definitely good news, since this may not be as widespread of an event. However, the wind speeds will go up, and this will still be a pretty big storm surge threat, especially in the vulnerable coast of Louisiana and Mississippi. So definitely don't underestimate this. Even though this hasn't really been strengthening that much in terms of millibar pressure, since the wind speed is going up, and this storm surge and the rainfall threat will definitely cause havoc across the Gulf Coast. However, I would expect in the next update, this storm won't only increase its strength when it comes to winds, but I think millibar pressure as well, because we've just been seeing a lot more convection than we were seeing yesterday and over the past several hours, as we're seeing a lot of convection towards center circulation and to the eastern portion of this storm. However, beyond this point, I don't expect that much strengthening, and maybe a little bit of weakening just before it makes landfall. And it's as a result of this upper level trough that's, I would say, centered just off the coast of Texas, that's currently bringing strong upper level winds pretty much all throughout the western Gulf of Mexico. And as Marco continues to move up north, it's gonna definitely begin to feel the wind shear aloft, because we have a lower level high that's trying to pretty much steer Marco all the way to the west. However, we have this upper level low that's trying to steer Marco to the north and east, and when we have the lower level winds pretty much going the opposite direction of the upper level winds, that causes wind shear, and tropical cyclones don't like that, because it loses focus from it doesn't really have a very focused center of circulation, and the winds will be diverted all over the place, and the winds won't really coincide with each other within the tropical cyclone, which will cause weakening in Tropical Storm Marco. However, I don't expect that much weakening either, because it's still going to be over the extremely warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, where there's a lot of upper ocean heat content at this point. So while there will be strong wind shear it's going to deal with, I think the extremely warm water of the Gulf of Mexico will prevent this from ever weakening very much from this point, as maybe it will only weaken about 5 to 10 miles per hour from 75 miles per hour, maybe make landfall as a 70 mile per hour storm, and if we're lucky, maybe 65, but I don't expect much strengthening or much weakening beyond this point. And what's also going to prevent this from really strengthening much is the dry air that's going to be in front of it, because as Marco continues to move north, that wind shear is going to push a lot of that dry air into the center of circulation. And if we take a look at the current wind shear, you see the reds represent unfavorable conditions, and tropical storm Marco is it's pretty much at the doorstep of these strong upper level winds that are going to completely divert the anti-cyclone vorticity off to the north and east. So it's going to lose focus of where, and so the winds are going to lose focus of where exactly it'll go, and that will weaken the winds as a result, since the winds will be diverted into, along with these upper level winds. So the point is that don't expect much strengthening or much weakening beyond this point, as it seems like Marco is mainly going to maintain the strength. However, I wouldn't be surprised in the next update this strengthens into a hurricane and maybe weakens before it makes landfall. However, at this point, I wouldn't be hanging on to the idea that this will weaken along the Gulf Coast, because when we're talking about a difference of between only 5 to 10 miles per hour, that isn't much of, you won't experience much impact. You won't experience much of a difference in terms of impact. So Louisiana, Mississippi, and even Alabama prepare for this as if a hurricane is going to make landfall in your area. It won't be a major hurricane. It won't be completely devastating. However, it's still definitely something to prepare for, since this is still a hurricane, and it's going to cause a pretty strong storm surge threat all throughout the Louisiana coast, Mississippi, and even going as far east as Alabama. So if you're in flood prone areas, definitely watch out for that if you're along the Louisiana coast. And there's a current National Hurricane Center track as of the 10 a.m. Central Daylight Time advisory, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time advisory, and you see that the storm and you see it's pretty inevitable at this point that it's going to make landfall somewhere in southeast Louisiana. The track shifted a little bit more west today, as it seems like the storm won't be as strong, so it won't feel as much of the upper level winds that are trying to push it to the northeast. However, the shift in track to the west is very minimal. For the most part, staying mainly within the same track as it was yesterday, maybe a slight shift to the west, but that's about it. And it seems, and hurricane warnings are now issued all throughout southeast Louisiana, and I wouldn't be surprised if New Orleans gets involved in those hurricane warnings, because this might have a little bit of a stronger, this might have a little bit of a larger wind field towards the eastern portion of this storm as this storm continues to move north, since we're going to see the upper level winds move from mainly the south to the north direction, which could increase the size of the wind field on the eastern side of this storm. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if these hurricane watches, which are currently issued for New Orleans, get upgraded into hurricane warnings. So in terms of wind impacts, what to expect, definitely if you're under the hurricane warnings, definitely expect hurricane force wind gusts. I would expect winds between, especially around the eye wall, winds between maybe 35 to 50 miles per hour sustained, and gusts potentially over 75 in multiple areas. And there may be a slight chance of a tornado threat, since dry air may infiltrate it, and there's going to be a lot of wind shear with this storm. So definitely watch out for that as a tornado threat as well. And in terms of the storm surge threat, there's going to be a pretty big storm surge threat for just a low end hurricane, and you have to keep in mind that the coast of Louisiana and Mississippi is extremely vulnerable to these types of storms, and and the coast is extremely vulnerable to storm surge. So 4 to 6 feet is definitely possible all throughout southeast Louisiana, 2 to 4 feet through Mississippi, and 1 to 3 feet as far east as Alabama, and even as far west as the border of Louisiana and Texas may experience some storm surge, up to 2 to 4 feet in Morgan City, and Lake Charles, Louisiana, around that vicinity, should definitely expect 2 to 4 feet of storm surge from the storm. And in terms of rainfall, while I don't think this map shows the full extent of how much rain you'll experience inland, I would expect for the most part in Louisiana around 5 to 8 inches of rain, especially towards the eastern side of this storm, where they're going to experience most of the precipitation from this storm, because dry air is mainly going to be to the west of this storm. So definitely watch out for a rainfall threat, especially if you're in a flood prone area. Make sure to prepare if you're in those areas as if this is going to be a huge flood threat, because it's better to be safe than sorry. And 5 to 8 inches of rain is definitely not something to mess around with, since keep in mind that only 6 inches of swiftly moving water can knock you off your feet, and 2 feet of water could move a car. So definitely don't underestimate the water, and remember the leading cause of death in tropical cyclones are from flooding. So if you're in a flood prone area inland or along the coast, definitely prepare for Marco, since it's coming very, very soon. Pretty much tomorrow, it should be right at Louisiana's doorstep, as a forecast states. Around the afternoon on Monday, this should make landfall. There might be slight changes, but overall, afternoon of Monday, you should definitely be ready for this storm. And by 7 a.m. Monday, you might experience the outer bands of this. So this is pretty much the last day to prepare for Louisiana. So definitely prepare now if you're along the Louisiana coast. But now let's move on to Tropical Storm Laura, which has the possibility to impact the exact same area as Marco, only 2 to 3 days after Marco. And my hope was yesterday that this will move over the Dominican Republic, pretty much with the wind speed beginning to slow down as it moves over the Dominican Republic and Haiti, because of the higher elevation mountains over this area. But while the low pressure technically did move over Dominican Republic, it wasn't enough to weaken it, and in fact it strengthened slightly. And I think it's as a result of the convection that was happening towards the southern side of this storm, which pretty much made this storm maintain its wind speed. And plus the fact that this storm wasn't dealing with that much dry air or wind shear also benefited it to the point where it didn't really weaken at all like we hope, which is definitely unfortunate. And it seems like this storm, at this point, it's pretty much impossible that this will completely die out into anything less than a tropical storm, since it's under fairly favorable conditions. And even as it moves over Cuba, I still think it's going to be close enough to the water to where it'll absorb some of the warm Caribbean Sea water and some of the Atlantic Ocean water. So I don't expect it to really get any weaker than what it is right now, which is definitely unfortunate, since we all hope that this will die off, but it doesn't seem like that'll be the case in the future. And if we take a look at the Laura's current composition, you see that it looks fairly healthy for the most part. There isn't really much evidence that there's strong wind shear slowing down this storm, because you see the outflow is pretty much the outflow clouds are pretty much diverting away from the center of circulation in all areas. Usually when their storm is dealing with strong wind shear, we would usually see that the outflow clouds move along with the upper level winds. However, that's definitely not the case, as we're seeing the outflow clouds move all throughout the outskirts of this storm, which shows that it's under fairly healthy conditions. And when it comes to dry air, there isn't a ton of dry air either. There is a little bit of dry air just to the east of Florida and maybe south of Cuba and right around the Bahama Islands, but it's too far and it isn't enough to really slow this thing down. And my fear was that if it wasn't for Dominican Republic or Haiti slowing this storm down, this could have easily strengthened maybe into a strong tropical storm if it did take that northern track that I was fearing yesterday. Fortunately, it went over the islands, which weakened it. However, it did bring a lot of flooding over the islands, unfortunately, and you definitely need to watch out along the islands because flash flooding and river flooding is still definitely going to be a major threat throughout these islands. And also Cuba is still under tropical storm warning, so definitely watch out for that. And this doesn't seem like it's going to weaken over these islands. So in terms of the composition of this storm, it seems fairly healthy. The eye at this point is pretty much right on the border of between the coast of Haiti and right just north of the Port-au-Prince region, as this plot shows, where the low pressure is about to move out into the open waters of the Atlantic, and I wouldn't be surprised as it does. It might strengthen a little bit in this small space of water between Haiti and Cuba, because it's, like I said, it's under fairly favorable conditions right now, and I think it could have a chance of strengthening before it makes another landfall in Cuba. And in terms of what's the future of this storm, right now here's a current forecast track from the National Hurricane Center, where the National Hurricane Center is moving the storm over Cuba, but maintaining its strength, which I do expect as well, because it's going to be close enough to the water where it won't really weaken or completely die off. And then the National Hurricane Center quite easily strengthens this hurricane. And while the National Hurricane Center forecast track isn't showing it right now, I definitely wouldn't be surprised if we see a major hurricane by Tuesday or maybe Wednesday of this week. And that's definitely going to be a major worry for Louisiana, which is just going to experience Marco at this point. And now the track has shifted a little bit more to the west, and I suspect the reason is that the ridge that's currently steering Laura is going to be a little bit more dominant by the time we head into Wednesday and Thursday, to the point where this storm might shift, the storm's track might shift a little bit west. But when we're talking about 3 to 5 days out, this could easily change. We have to see how this ridge continues to react and maneuver over the next several days, because that's going to be important to determine whether or the track for this storm. And also the track matters when it comes to intensity, because if it takes a more westward and maybe southward track where it might be more of a threat to Texas and maybe Houston and Galveston, then we're more likely to see a stronger tropical cyclone and definitely more likely to see a major hurricane make landfall in Texas, because it's going to have a lot more time over water. And based off of what the GFS model is saying, it's going to experience extremely favorable conditions for tropical cyclone development, because if we move over the next several days, there isn't going to be that much wind shear over Laura that's going to slow this thing down. And then if we move on to around the Tuesday time frame, you're going to see that the conditions are extremely favorable. The wind shear is going to be fairly light, and you see for the most part it's fairly light. There's a little bit of wind shear here from this upper level high, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be that it doesn't seem like it's going to be that major, and it's for the most part going to be it's going to be mainly light, this wind shear. And if we take a look at the 700 millibar to 400 millibar relative humidity, there isn't going to be a ton of dry air either to slow this thing down. And this is definitely worrying for me, because at this point I don't see much unfavorable conditions that will slow this thing down in the Gulf of Mexico and that could mean this could rapidly intensify in the Gulf of Mexico. And while the National Hurricane Center isn't forecasting that right now, I expect the reason is that we're still like days out, and usually forecast models, when we're talking about days out, and National Hurricane Center, when they're trying to forecast a tropical cyclone days out, they usually take the more conservative route. However, based off of what we're seeing right now, I would expect a major hurricane to make landfall somewhere along the Gulf Coast. This could easily change. However, maybe over the next couple of days, the National Hurricane Center and the forecast models begin to detect a little bit more wind shear that could slow this thing down, and maybe a little bit more dry air that could slow this thing down. However, at this point, it seems like a major hurricane is becoming more and more likely at this point, as Laura is going to experience fairly favorable conditions over the Gulf of Mexico. And in terms of the track forecast, like I said, it really depends on how this it really depends on this ridge, this huge ridge of high pressure, and how far east it goes, how far west. Because if it moves a little bit more east and than the states eastward, like Alabama, and maybe even as far east as the Florida Panhandle, might experience more impacts. However, if it moves more to the west, this may be more of a Louisiana and even Texas threat. So we definitely need to see how this ridge maneuvers over the next several days to determine the track forecast. But as of right now, this seems like this is going to strengthen rapidly over the Gulf of Mexico, and the Gulf of Mexico, all the Gulf of Mexico, pretty much all the entire Gulf Coast should be at extremely high alert, since it's possible that you won't not only experience Marco, but potentially major Hurricane Laura. We still have to see over the next several days. There's still a lot of uncertainty to determine with this, but it doesn't look very good. That's the least I'll say as of right now. Hopefully it changes, but we'll see. But yeah, I guess that's it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to prepare along the Gulf Coast, and also make sure to subscribe if you like more content. And I hope you guys have a good day.